for any attendee who came last year, Kim and I had a fireside chat, which I think racked up the most YouTube views out of any video in the conference. So I think we're building on that. Now we have an extra guest, Leon, as well. So hopefully this is interesting. But I guess, the crux of the matter is our session is about sustainable agriculture. And we'll unpack, how Rabobank is dealing with that and Manta Labs as well. Obviously, as many people would appreciate, in a forestry and agriculture conference, they're in essence two sides of the same coin, right? In terms of leading causes of deforestation loss, biodiversity loss, and the like. So I think that's why it's really key for us to unpack what are the key issues here when it comes to sustainable agriculture. How can we bring in innovation to try and deal with some of the issues and I guess, incentivize farmers and others to actually, cultivate in a sustainable way. So I guess we can start with personal intros. I will start furthest with Leon. If you could give us a bit of, background into yourself, and then, afterwards, Kim and I can also go as well.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Leon. Father of two boys, love the outdoor life, live in the Netherlands, and involved in this voluntary carbon market for 3 years now. I have a background in debt capital markets at Rabo and marketing at Google, but I think it never had so much fun actually working in this industry because everything feels so new. There are so many opportunities out there. You really feel like you are contributing to something, something tangible. And for us personally, the relation to food and agriculture is, of course, highly interesting. Being a foodie myself, I'm at the right place.
Nice.
Over to you.
Kim?
Yeah. Morning, everybody. My name's Kim. Actually, I got into this through. It's a bit.
Yeah, we can.
It's all my mum's fault.
Oh.
So, yeah. So about 25 years ago, my mum lives in Ireland, and we were driving through the Burren, which is I know now, a karst landscape. But she asked, how does a landscape like this form? So that question in itself, and Khalil, you mentioned questions driving your career. So this question actually led me to do earth sciences, and I specialize in climatology. And I feel extremely lucky that I did that all those years ago, because in the last 20 years I've been working on the nexus of business model development and market-based mechanisms, and actually, well, I would now say impact entrepreneurship. So lots of carbon market stuff. My first project was in the Philippines on how we could use carbon payments to actually gain revenue for poor upland communities. That was in 2004, so exactly 20 years ago. Super happy to still be in this market. Now at Rabo for 4 years. I had the nature-based solutions team, and if I'm not doing that, I actually do a lot of outdoor sports. Also live in the Netherlands. I have a 10-year-old daughter whom I'm trying to also instill this love of the outdoor life and nature, and that's going pretty well. She loves it. So
Great.
Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about kids here, and in our intros, I'll say I'm the father of two daughters, so I'm a girl dad myself. But more to my professional life, I'm CEO of Manta Labs. I come from a background as an agriculture commodities trader, so this is well into my second decade being involved in agriculture. And in my prior life, I used remote sensing, data science as well to assess crop yields globally to try and trade and the agriculture commodities markets. So with Mantle, we really do combine remote sensing, environmental modeling, and data science to do due diligence and monitoring of nature-based carbon projects across the full spectrum of nature. And I think that's why we're fortunate to be able to have done some really excellent work with Rabobank, which we're going to unpack in a second, but also with things like RED projects as well, where we're a very approved deforestation data provider and did their threat analysis for Peru, for ARR, which I think has been mentioned a fair bit, and there's excitement around the AMC that was announced recently. We work with some of the members of that group, so we really have a kind of behind-the-scenes view of how that's developing. And then also, obviously, with things like regenerative agriculture, which has huge potential, and we'll touch on that in a second. And then also things like rice, methane, which hasn't, I think, been mentioned yet. Anyone who knows me or spoken to me for 5 minutes knows that I can't stop myself talking about rice. And it's not just because I'm a ferocious consumer of the stuff, which I am, but because we are talking about a product here which contributes around 50% of global methane emissions. In some countries like Japan, rice is around 50, so 50% of their methane emissions comes from rice cultivation. But, and I'm going to stop the rice TED talk in a second, we have easy solutions, cost-effective solutions, and we have pretty robust monitoring, and we're doing projects with Vera, Gold Standard, and leading developers on that. But anyway, off my soapbox, and I think to kind of continue the conversation, Rabobank is the world's largest agricultural lender. So you guys are in a really unique position when it comes to seeing the nexus of agriculture and forestry and how it can scale globally as well. So I guess let's start with you, Kim, as the head of MBS at Rabo. Can you talk us through your journey into the voluntary carbon markets and any kind of learnings you've had thus far?
Yeah, obviously, thanks. So about 4.5 years ago, our then CEO was at Davos, and he was personally challenged by some of the members, and I think of the delegates there. Like, as the world's largest agricultural bank, you are financing part of the problem, right? I mean, food and ag is responsible for about 25 to 30%, depending on how you count, of global emissions. And as a financier, we play a part. But what are you doing about financing the solution? And I think what is really interesting about agriculture is that it can be both a source and a sink. If you look at the fossil fuel industry, if you look past their advertising, it's pretty hard to make that same that same claim. But agriculture can. And that question again turned into what is now the carbon bank. We sit in the nexus between farmers. We fund large-scale rural producers all over the world that have access to land that can actually capture carbon in their soils, in forests, but we also have access to about 85% of the world's food and ag corporates, which of course are looking at decarbonization and offsetting and insetting, etc. So our first forays were into the soil carbon market, where we worked together with you, John, on how to actually quantify carbon in the soils. Learned a lot of lessons, how not to do things, mostly. And now are working really hard on a few projects specifically now geared at Brazil and New Zealand. In Brazil, we're looking at, we're doing afforestation, avoided deforestation, and soil carbon restoration, because we really believe that it is in that nexus, that integration of all, that we need to innovate. Because at the end of the day, agriculture also drives deforestation. If you have underproductive land and degrading land, you move into the forest. So you can only tackle one if you also look at the root causes. And that's where we try to bring a full package of solutions.
Well, and I'll bring Leon in a second, because that keyword innovation you mentioned, Kim, and hopefully we can also lean into your background at Google as well. But, I must give Rabo your flowers, I guess, from a perspective of, being open to innovation. That soil carbon project you mentioned, where you guys had us and I think 11 other people quantifying soil organic carbon, different methods. We used remote sensing for our method, to give us our flowers we want, so to speak. And now we scale from 600 to 12,000 acres. But I think, I found it quite interesting, having come from a large bank myself previously, to see that Rabo was willing to innovate, to bring in different industry players, startups, and the like. So I don't know, maybe Leon and then Kim, what is the role of innovation, you think, and how does Rabo, kind of play in that space to try and scale sustainable agriculture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. Maybe the role of innovation, maybe tying back to previous employer Google, is a company great at taking the right risks when it comes to innovation. And in banks, that's of course different, because banks are maybe risk averse. Maybe it's also a good idea to maybe segue into a question to you all, because this session is about innovation, right? And I think innovation is something you do on a personal level. You feel the personal drive to change something, but you need to make all the internal stakeholders you deal with part of the process you go through. So I would like to see some hands. Who feels confident and supported by your internal organization to take the right risks when it comes to trying something new.
That's actually a really
It's
good.
not
That's a
bad,
good score.
Wow.
Not sure if you can all see it, but I think around 30% of the group was raising his hand in feeling supported to take the right risk. So I think that's actually great news. I think for me and Kim, the segue into the car market for Rabo has been challenging because for a bank it wasn't easy to take the risk of being a project developer in this market, right? We don't finance things yet. We're looking at brokering carbon credits in the future, but for now we're just developing them. And I think for a bank that's a really complex position to be in, but also a position we're in because we have partners that allow us to understand how technology works, to identify the right risk we want to take with the rewards that actually work for us. I think talking about risks, we also look at the risk side of our clients when working in this voluntary car market, which is maybe the reason why we're actually here. We started this, as Kim mentioned, from the farmer perspective because we see that farmers in our portfolio need to become more sustainable to be prone to climate risks. Of course, they need to be more sustainable to supply the right food to their off-takers. But on the longer term horizon, Rabo being a cooperative bank with a longer term horizon, climate risk is actually a key issue we look at in different regions. We have 8 different commodities in 8 different regions where we see a huge concentration of risks that we need to address. We also identified that it's really difficult to direct resources from the food and ag value chain to the farmer to actually accelerate this sustainability transition. It feels like the consumer, the retailer, and some players in between are not always willing to pay a higher price for a more sustainable product. Being a bank, we're not in the business to give presents. We also need to pay the bills. So, of course, Kim will talk about it later, how we accelerate sustainability using our own incentives. But for us, the voluntary car market is, of course, a great way to accelerate the transition that needs to happen on farm level and to finance it and to accelerate that by our role as a bank.
Any frustrations, though, with the voluntary carbon market? None? Yeah?
No.
Okay.
It works very smooth.
I really like the lack of complexity.
I think, yeah, of course, some frustrations. I mean, when you talk to a farmer and try to explain how this market works, right, we miss some alignment. Yeah. I think when I went to one of our larger US clients, a corn and soybean farmer, he was in a carbon farming program for a year with a few acres, not his entire business. And we had some ceremony in terms of sharing the rewards. He flew into the meeting with a private jet. I'm not sure if that's the client we are looking for, but it is the right incentive for the farmer that we're talking about. He was saying, when you look at the voluntary car market and price levels where they are now, the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's so difficult to be part of a voluntary car market program for a corn and soybean farmer. And then the rewards don't really meet the expectations that our clients have. So that's some of the frustrations that we have. I think another one, talking about risks, is what we see on the corporate side, the food and ag corporates that actually need to purchase these carbon credits. It's difficult for them to navigate this market. Of course, that means that there's a role for us in explaining it, but I'm not sure if that's a role we need to take, right? This market needs to evaluate into something more scalable for the demand side.
But I totally appreciate, obviously, we've had some frustrations, and often agriculture seems shoehorned into the framework of the carbon market, right? Especially when it has concepts like additionality and the like. Okay. However, when you see things like dynamic baselines with the new Vera methodology, for example, right? I mean, how does that give you some optimism, right? And so for anyone who is not aware, obviously with a dynamic baseline, you are matching your project area to control points and monitoring the relative performance over time, right? So hopefully that in itself does give a great mechanism for adjudicating whether this project is additional or not. Any views on these kind of step changes we're seeing with respect to the VCM?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously there is some frustration. I think the market, how it evolved from way back, it was never meant and designed for agriculture. It wasn't even designed for forestry. It was designed for sustainable energy, large-scale projects. So there's all these archaic rules, regulations, processes, but there's also a self-correcting mechanism in the market. As you said, things like dynamic baselining, it's just slow. But I think a good thing about being a cooperative bank and having a long-term perspective on what that would mean for our client base and our rural portfolio also allows us to be a little bit more patient. We've been in this now for 4 years, which sounds like a long time, but it isn't. It's also trees seem to grow slow. But we can take that forward, and we're learning a lot. And when we started, there was 0 projects using VM42. Now the first ones are being registered. There's a lot being developed. There's way more experience on the technology side, on the MRV side, but also what actually are the right incentives. Because again, I think one of the things that we learned is that our traditional corn and soy farmer in the US Midwest might not be the perfect fit for a carbon program. However, our clients in Brazil that can actually switch from degraded pastures to more productive integrated systems with crops and livestock that are actually restoring soils because the incentive is bigger. The step change of the old to the new is way clearer. It's a clearer story on additionality. There's a larger delta. All these things come into play, and the role of technology, just to go into the risks and innovation. One of the great things about working, for the first time in 17 years, I signed an employment contract, which was very scary. But one of the reasons to do so, and to go to Rabobank, is actually that the name itself opens doors. So we get to work with some of the best, most innovative companies out there. And that in itself also allowed us to really innovate, because we might not be the best at innovation, but we get to work with the best in innovation. So that is something that I really highly enjoy, and it's bringing us to new places. There's more than glimmers of hope. I think there's real hope in the market. You can see that here. A lot of the talk has been about challenges, but there's also a lot of enthusiasm and I think trust that we can overcome the challenges. And that's something in the whole room, but also in our meetings and with farmers. I'm very hopeful about what we can do.
Oh, what a maverick, Kim, signing that employment contract after all that time.
John, how do you look at hope in this market? Also,
There was a hope. I think there was mention of the AMC, for example, right? So obviously we are seeing some tentative signs of buyer demand coming back, right? So that's good. However, I have a question for the audience. Does anyone know what abacus is? See, abahu, right? And this is it. The first criteria that the AMC stated on their website and in their press release was these projects need to be abacus compliant, right? Now, what is abacus? And this really dovetails very nicely with what we're discussing, this nexus between agriculture and forestry. So, Kim, do you know what abacus is? Can you give us a bit of
told me.
an inkling? I told you yesterday, didn't I?
No. So it's a new development, right? The label isn't final yet, as we understand, but it does really tie into what we feel is integral to the market, which is that integration of agriculture and forestry, because abacus assumes almost full leakage.
100% leakage.
Right.
Yes.
So if we reforest a forest, it assumes that it will be displaced elsewhere, unless you can work on yields, because the root cause and the driving force is agriculture. So that's why we look at this exact ecosystem where, and again, our client base, for instance, in countries like Brazil, are the largest farmers out there. They are huge landowners. At that scale, they inherently have to do with and livestock and forests and soil for their soy and corn operations. So by treating that together and working on yield improvement programs using regenerative agriculture, you also take away the root cause of forestry. And that's why we think actually abacus could be a game changer as well, in terms of quality, integrity, and also setting yourself apart from the competition.
And to be clear, abacus is a label on top of VM47. It is one of the first, I think it is actually the first label that Vera has issued. And it assumes, obviously, dynamic baseline, but that's assumed anyway in the base methodology. But it also assumes this leakage concept that Kim has mentioned, which means that you need to do some kind of agricultural-related productivity enhancements with respect to that land that you're looking at. And this is where I think from our Manta Labs perspective, because we have very agricultural backgrounds, we do forestry and agriculture, we do yields. I tried to do yield prediction in my prior life with moderate success as well. So I think this is where we can lean into, okay, how can we not only restore the land, but also take into account that we also need to, as the DFIs and everyone in this conference has said repeatedly, we need to feed, circa, 10 billion people over the coming decades as well, right? So I think this is where Abacus is a really innovative concept. We're working with our partners in the AMC and also with Cambridge University to really define what Abacus is. So if anyone wants to have a conversation on that, you can reach out because I'm running out of time as well. So anyway, I think we have the voluntary carbon market, which we're trying to obviously get fine-tuned from an agricultural perspective, and I think that's great. Any other innovative ways though that we can actually incentivize this kind of sustainable agriculture? And I ask that you guys are in a privileged position being an agricultural lender, so maybe you have some insights. Let's start with Leon maybe and move across, or should we move from Kim and move that way? Tell me any other ways you think that we can actually try and incentivize beyond just the VCM.
So as someone with 20 years of experience in the carbon markets, both compliance and voluntary, this might come as a surprise, but I don't think the voluntary carbon market or the compliance market is the silver bullet at all. I think it's a tool, and it's part of our quiver of solutions that we have, that we as a sector have. But I think it will only work if we combine it in the right way. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at, for instance, loan discounts that we can give for producers that commit to zero deforestation on their full farm, for instance. And as Sam from Mirova yesterday said, I think one of the things that can underpin that is the rigor in the carbon market. So as the most rigorous of all impact investing sectors or spaces, you can use that quantification and the rigor that is actually inherent to underpin the MRV that's needed to make sure that you're getting the effect you want. And that would allow us to de-risk, to your point, Leon, that future of that farmer and give that loan discount. So it's something we're testing out. We're actually running a first program to test how this would work. Super interesting, because then you can have additional income for our producers through carbon and regenerative ag, and lower financing costs, which in itself would, we hope, be the catalyst for further change in the transition to the world that we want to see.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Leon, anything you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, some of the topics we're also looking at is leveraging not land ownership, because Raba would never own land. We would compete with our own clients. But leveraging maybe the carbon market and providing a stable income stream for farmers based on lease payments on forestry-related work that we do on their agricultural land. It's a topic we segued into, but don't have a final answer yet. And I think another topic we're closely following, because it appeals to a lot of our farmers in the Midwest, is carbon intensity.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You've awoken me now with carbon intensity.
Yeah, we're not doing active work there yet, but we do see that the carbon intensity model is very appealing for our clients because it's really clear. Corn and soybean farmers can achieve a low carbon intensity score by doing no-till, cover crops, reduced fertilizer. That's a very clear story to our clients, and they also can achieve price premiums from the industry.
Well, I think that's a really interesting concept because, when I was, going around the Midwest talking to different farmers, you feel really bad because the pioneers, they're left out, right? Yeah. So if I was doing, regenerative agriculture for 10, 20 years, I'm excluded from the carbon market because of additionality, right? So that's the real tension. But when you have something like CI scoring, it flips that concept on its head, because you actually want to engage or source your feedstock for ethanol or whatever else from a pioneer farmer. You want someone who has been practicing these activities over a long period of time, and thereby has a lower carbon intensity score. So I think it really is great from that perspective, right? Spurring and helping those people who have been pioneers in industry. I would say as well, the VCM, it's the carrot approach, and from an agriculture perspective, having spoken to farmers again, it is a fairly meager and small carrot, right? That's being dangled in their faces when they have to think about, I need to probably get new machinery and I need to, get new seeds and all these things. So we have that carrot, and hopefully with the carbon intensity, we have another carrot and these financing mechanisms you mentioned. In the EU, you also have a stick, right?
Yeah.
And the stick is something like EUDR. So I think interestingly, we have all these different mechanisms, and I think over time we're going to slightly kind of converge on something as well. So we're getting to the last legs. Don't worry, I know everyone wants another refreshing cup of coffee if you're an addict like I am. But anything exciting we can leave, our attendees, our fellow conference members with?
I wanted to go into rice, but you already did.
You wanted to go into rice? Yeah. Okay. Well, we need another session, unfortunately, for that, Haley. If you can unlock that for me, that would be great. But one thing I would say, obviously, we've seen these, changes of the methodologies with ARR, which is great. We mentioned VM42 as well for agriculture. Vera has a new rice methodology coming out later on this year, which I think so far has canvassed a fair bit of interest. We ourselves are leveraging remote sensing to look at the flooding patterns in the paddies. We also have process modelers who are able to calculate methane and other greenhouse gas emissions as well. We actually do that on CI scoring as well. So we use the Greek model and can calculate that with respect to biofuel tax credits. So I think, going back to rice, it's obviously we already spoke about the methane emissions. It's a fairly quick intervention, right? Cost effective as well, fairly cheap, which in the current cost of capital environment versus ARR is very appealing. So yeah, I'll just encourage you, if you can, have a look at rice if it's of interest. There was even a project in the US which was announced a couple of days ago, which was interesting. But anyway, besides rice, and I warned you not to get me started on it.
I'm sorry.
Anything else exciting in the market worth mentioning? It's fine if there's nothing. But
I think we are piloting our first insetting deals. So in the coffee value chain, it was actually by accident. We noticed some of the smallholder farmers we work with in our Acorn program are also part of the value chain of our large coffee clients. And they were very interested and open to exploring what an insetting deal could look like. And we closed our first transactions there. And I think that's a very appealing way of integrating incentives in the value chain and building a stronger connection into who's actually supplying takers with coffee.
Yeah, and I think talking about innovation, it's also that fungibility between in and offsetting. Fair pricing insetting is hard because what is the price? And nobody seems and in this case, you can actually price it because you know what the credit would be worth in the offset market, and you can then buy that within the value chain with different players, and that would reduce the cost per ton for the players in the chain, but still garner a fair price for the ultimate producer of that carbon result. And I think that's also innovation and something that's super exciting and up and coming.
Yeah, I think, and we're wrapping up, Haley, don't worry. I think insetting obviously is interesting. Agribusinesses, 90% of their emissions are like scope 3 emissions typically at the farm level. So insetting makes a lot of sense, especially the unique characteristics, as you mentioned, of agriculture as being a sink as well. But let's learn the lessons from the voluntary carbon market, right? Let's try and take the best practices, whether it's around additionality and everything else, and make sure those frameworks are in place. I know Vera is trying to see how they can, and Gold Standard, trying to see how they can translate those methodologies from the offsetting to the insetting landscape. And we're hoping to continue and collaborate with, Rabobank on seeing how we can provide value to agribusinesses, farmers, and hopefully overall with sustainable agriculture. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We don't have time for questions, do we?
We don't?
Yeah, so time for coffee, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.